1930. With 10 teams returning, the league added the Portsmouth Spartans as an 11th franchise. The Triangles would also relocate from Dayton to Brooklyn, becoming the Brooklyn Football Dodgers. The Tornadoes relocated from Orange to Newark. The Packers clinched their second straight title with a tie against the Spartans. Had Tiny Lewis made the crucial extra point for the Spartans, the title would have gone to the Giants. At the end of the season, both the Tornadoes and Red Jackets folded. 1931. To even out the league to 10 teams, a third incarnation of the Cleveland Indians were added as an expansion team. Halfway through the season, the Yellow Jackets would fold after winning only one of their 8 games. They were joined at the end of the season by the folding Steamroller, as well as the Indians, decreasing the league to 7 teams. With a record of 12-2, the Packers claimed their third consecutive title, tying the record for most titles with the Bulldogs. 1932. Expanding from the returning 7 teams to 8, the league added a team in Boston, who were named the Braves after the local National League Baseball franchise. Despite the Packers having the most wins, they also played the most games, meaning the league's best winning percentage ended in a tie between the Bears and Spartans. To resolve the championship dispute, the league scheduled the first officially sanctioned championship game, to be played in Chicago on December 18th. Originally planned to be held at the Bears' home stadium of Wrigley Field, a temperature drop and blizzard conditions forced the game to be moved indoors to the local arena, Chicago Stadium, the home of the NHL's Blackhawks. Because of the dimensions of the arena and the lack of reliable indoor turf at the time, the field was painted on a layer of dirt, which itself was fitted inside the hockey boards. This essentially became the first technical arena football game. The bizarre atmosphere of the game resulted in a complete lack of traditional offense. The Bears would go on to win 9-0, securing their second title. The game itself was such a failure of planning and communication between league officials and the on-field personnel that the resulting offseason would see one of the largest rulebook changes in the history of the league. The Stapletons would also fold, leaving 7 teams to return the following season. 1933. Expanding to 10 teams, the league added 3 new franchises in the Cincinnati Reds, Pittsburgh Pirates, and Philadelphia Eagles. To separate themselves from their baseball counterpart, the Braves changed their team name to the Redskins. With the failure of the previous year's championship, the league decided to abandon its use of college football rules and instead revise the rulebook for their own usage. Some of these changes included the legalization of any forward pass directly behind the line of scrimmage, rather than requiring a dropback, central hash marks to limit the location of ball placements, and the shifting of the goalpost to the front of the end zone rather than the back, where they would remain for the following 4 decades. The league also saw the first use of divisions to minimize travel costs, creating an Eastern and a Western division, each containing 5 teams. With the Bears and the Giants each winning their respective division, the pair met in a more traditional championship game, this time held outdoors at Wrigley Field. In a close contest, the Bears outlasted the Giants for a final score of 23-21, securing their second straight title and tying the record of the Packers and Bulldogs with 3. 1934. For the first time in league history, the league began the new season with the same teams that ended the previous. The offseason saw a change in rules for an incomplete pass. Previously, an incomplete pass resulted in a 5-yard penalty, but this was changed to the modern rule of a dead ball and a forfeit of a down, as well as an incompletion of a backward pass becoming a live fumble. In a darker history, the NFL would institute the first season of what would be a 12-year ban on black players participating in the league. A silent agreement between owners in the offseason saw a complete segregation and dismissal of any black players or staff from all 10 teams, though for what can only be assumed was on behalf of the league's history and leadership, other minority players such as Native Americans and Mexicans continued to play alongside whites. The Spartans moved from Portsmouth to Detroit and became the Detroit Lions. After losing 8 straight games to start the season, the Reds forfeited their remaining schedule and folded, though the league managed to secure a scheduling deal with the independent St. Louis Gunners, who played out the Reds' remaining 3 games and even garnered a single victory over the Pirates. Again, the Giants and Bears championed their respective divisions, and in a championship rematch, this time held in New York, it was the Giants who secured the title by a score of 30-13. Now known as the Sneakers Game, the secret to the Giants' success was a change in wardrobe halfway through the game. With the playing surface frozen solid, the Giants abandoned their original turf cleats and replaced them with traditional tennis shoes for the remainder of the game. They were awarded the first ever Ed Thorpe Trophy, which would become the league's official championship hardware until the establishment of the Super Bowl in 1967. 1935. With the Reds having folded and the Gunners deciding not to take their place the following season, the NFL was reduced to just 9 teams for 1935. For the first time, the league intended every team to play the same number of games, though this idea was abandoned after a heavy rainfall on the East Coast left Philadelphia's Baker Bowl unplayable, and the contest between the Eagles and Redskins was abandoned. However, this would be the last time any league teams would play fewer games than any other, the only exception coming in the 2022 season with the Damar Hamlin incident. With the Giants sweeping the East for the 3rd consecutive season, the Western Division ended up spectacularly close, with all 4 teams within 2 games of the title. This was the final season in which every team from a single division ended the year with a winning record, until 2023, when the AFC North accomplished the same. In the end, it was the Lions who came out on top, hosting the Giants at University Stadium in Detroit and capturing their first title by a score of 26-7. At the end of the season, the league instituted the first ever NFL draft, where teams could select graduating college players without the interference of political or financial strong-arming. Held at the Ritz in Philadelphia, the first overall pick went to the league-worst Philadelphia Eagles, with which they selected the first ever Heisman winner, Jay Berwanger, a halfback from the University of Chicago. Despite being both the first Heisman winner as well as the first ever draft pick, Berwanger declined to sign for both the Eagles or the Bears, believing he was worth more than they were offering. He instead chose to abandon football altogether and train for the Olympic decathlon, though he failed to make the cut and completely missed the Olympics. 1936. All 9 teams returned from the previous season, all with a uniform schedule of 12 games, which would become the norm for the next decade. For the first time, the Eastern Division was won by a team other than the Giants, this time going to the Redskins, while the West was won for the first time by the Packers. Having struggled with low ticket sales in Boston, as well as poor home field advantage at Fenway Park, the Redskins declined home field advantage in the championship, and the game was instead moved to Polo Grounds in New York City, where the Packers dominated the Redskins 21-6 and set a new championship record of 4. At the end of the season, a second NFL draft was held at the Hotel Lincoln in New York, where the Eagles selected Nebraska running back Sam Francis with the first overall pick. 1937. The 9 teams from the previous 2 seasons were joined by an expansion franchise in the form of the Cleveland Rams. The Redskins ultimately decided to forego their residency in Boston altogether and move south to the nation's capital, becoming the Washington Redskins. They would go on to win their first East Division title, while the Bears returned to top the West. The 2 teams met in that year's championship at Wrigley Field, where the visiting Redskins, led by quarterback Sammy Baugh, would come out victorious, giving the franchise its first league title. At that year's subsequent draft, the Cleveland Rams selected Indiana fullback Corbett Davis with the first overall pick. 1938. All 10 teams returning from the previous season, 1938 was notable for the first consistent implementation of a 15-yard roughing the passer penalty. The Giants and Packers both won their respective divisions with 8 out of 11 wins, and the 2 teams would meet in New York for a league championship, where the hometown Giants won by a score of 23-17 to secure their 3rd title. For the first time, a league MVP was named, in the form of the Giants center Mel Hein. This season also saw the first ever NFL All-Star Game, with a selection of the league's best coming together to face the championship Giants in an exhibition matchup at Wrigley Field. Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, that is, not Chicago. At the end of the year, the Cardinals drafted Texas Christian center Kai Aldrich with the first overall pick, notably passing over Heisman quarterback Davey O'Brien and future Bears Hall of Famer Sid Luckman. 1939. 10 teams continuing for another season, 1939 saw the first television broadcast for the NFL, with the October 22nd matchup between the Eagles and Dodgers transmitted through NBC to a limited local audience. The league was also reaching new heights with attendance. Teams were regularly selling out venues they commonly shared with their local baseball clubs. League-wide attendance records were reached for the 4th consecutive season, and a record was set at the Polo Grounds when 62,000 fans showed up to cheer the Giants over the Redskins. The Packers and Giants continued their dominance from the previous season, this time winning their respective divisions with 9 wins each, though in a completely different outcome, the Packers dominated the Giants in that year's championship, shutting them out 27-0 in the only title game ever competed in the state of Wisconsin. The league MVP was awarded to Rams halfback Parker Hall, and in the subsequent draft, the Cardinals passed over future Hall of Famer George McAfee to select Tennessee fullback George Cafago with the first overall pick.